Okay, everybody, let's get started. So Professor Chen is out of town today, so I'll replace him talking about production cost today. Maybe he thinks this stuff is so boring that he wants me to teach it, but it's very important in two senses. First, it describes the firm's behavior. So when you think of how firms make choice in the whole economy, you have to think about the production cost. The second sense is this part of material is a little bit math intensive compared to other lecture, but it is almost surely will show up on the exam. So make sure you pay full attention today. Okay? So let's begin. So when we're thinking of the production cost, we usually divide into two parts. The first part is a fixed cost. So what is a fixed cost? It just does not depend on the quantity of the output. So thinking of we are having a car factory. So to produce a car, you have to buy land for the factory. You have to set up the machines and the production lines. And all this money spent won't depend on how many cars you produce, right? So this part of cost, usually we calculate it as a fixed cost. And the other part of cost, we call it variable cost, because it will change as you produce more. It usually increases as you produce more. So come back to the car factory example. If you want to produce more car, you have to buy more parts. You have to hire more workers. You have to have more truckers to transport all the new car produced, right? So as you produce more, you have to spend more money to produce this, either on the material or other input. So that's a variable cost. So then the final equation is purely accounting, since that the total cost is adding fixed cost and the variable cost together. Okay? So everyone is clear with these two concepts? Okay. So now let's see a numeric example. So in the car factory example, for all the fixed costs, like the land, the machine, is 9,000. And the variable cost is, if you don't produce anything, you don't need to buy any parts, hire any workers. So the variable cost is 0 if the quantity is 0. But if you produce one car, you have to hire somebody to work. So this costs you $1,000. And if you produce two cars, you have to buy more parts, and maybe the workers have to work longer or you have more workers on. So the cost goes up. Okay? So the total cost is just purely the sum of these two. All right? So if we draw this on a diagram, what do we see? So first, we draw the total cost, right? So basically, the last column. I should have the. So we basically just draw this column in a diagram, and we will see. First, total cost rise at the level of output rises, right? This is just the basic intuition. As we produce more, the cost is higher. And this part, which means you have to spend this cost even when your quantity is 0. So this part captures the fixed cost part. And, okay, so sorry, here's just two more lines about the total cost. So this says total cost is the minimum cost of producing the output. It just means, it's not the firms waste something, or the workers are not have a unreasonable high wage or something. So it's just the total cost is already the producer trying hardest to minimize the cost already. So if you want the firm give you two cars, you have at least to cover their cost. So this part just says it's the minimum cost for producing the output. And total cost includes a reasonable profit. So here, this profit most means if you think of a normal return of investment. Think of I am an entrepreneur. If I put the money in the bank, I will have a 5% interest rate. So in that sense, the money I invest in the factory, Carfax should also give me 5% of return. So that means that could count as the total cost, right? The money I borrowed from the bank is also cost. So here it's just about the total cost. Then a very related concept and also important is average cost. It's very simple to calculate it. It's basically just you divide the total cost by the quantity. It tells you on each unit of the output how much the cost is. Okay? So here, back to the numbers, you all see that AC column is just total cost divided by the quantity, right? So if you draw the average cost on a curve, what do I see? You will find out it has a U shape here. So why does it have a U shape? Anyone get an idea? Okay. Pardon? Yeah, exactly. So why the average cost decrease when you increase output? Because the fixed cost will average out, right? So if you only produce one car, you have to pay all the machine, all the production line. But if you produce 2 or 10, then on each of the car, the average fixed cost is only a half or a tenth, right? So because usually the fixed cost is pretty large, as the quantity increase, the average cost decrease. That's because of the fixed cost part is averaged out among larger quantity. Then why this part is increasing? Yeah? Yeah. So as you increase your quantity, especially in the high level, then the variable cost might dominate the whole cost part, right? Like you buy all the material you can get in the United States, then you have to import some other steel from other country, and all the transportation costs may be really high to you. So then this part increase just means as the resource get more scarce, then the variable cost might increase as the quantity goes up, and it will drag the average cost up. Okay, yeah, question? Yeah, it has actually. So when you think of the economy to the scale, so it's basically have the decreasing level. It means as the scale is larger, it gets gains on economy-wise, right? So and this is decreasing. Okay. Any question? Okay. So now we come to a concept which can distinguish people who don't take Econ 1, right? So marginal cost. It has a similar flavor as the marginal willingness to pay. So marginal cost is thinking of if we forget whatever we put the money on the factory. If we produce one extra unit, how much money what is the cost? So maybe it's easier to use these numbers, right? So so the marginal cost, forget about the average cost. It's always come from the total cost. So what happens is if you produce 0, everything's 0. You don't calculate marginal cost. So if you thinking about the first unit, so fixed cost is 9,000, and if you produce 1 unit, the total cost is 10,000. So the extra money you spend producing from 0 to 1 is only 1,000, right? And similarly, if we check in the second unit, you want thinking about, okay, we already have the machine, we already have the factory, and we already produced the first unit. Now I'm thinking of whether I should produce a second unit. So the extra money to produce a second unit is 2,000, right? Because it costs you that much to produce 1 unit, and it costs totally that much for you to produce 2 units. So the difference tells you the extra cost for producing one extra unit. All right? So if you do this deduction everywhere, you will get this marginal cost, right? So if we draw this on a diagram, we will see it's increasing, right? So why it's increasing? It's exactly the reason what are we talking about, the increase in average cost. The marginal cost producing one more car is more costly because the resource is scarcer. There are less workers to be hired in the local city, and the parts price might go up if I produce more, if I, yeah. So that's why the marginal cost curve have an increase slope. And so here, we said it's for high output, because when you're in high enough output, the resource, scarcity of resource might kick in. But thinking of a low output, what would you guess about the marginal cost curve? Instead of it's steeply increasing, what would it be? It would be flatter, and it might even decrease, right? Why? Think of the beginning of the production. Pardon? No, so here, yeah, that's actually a very good point. So here the marginal cost has nothing to do with the fixed cost, right? Why? Because the fixed cost is 9,000. Fixed costs never change with the output. So here the question we're thinking is, what is the extra cost for extra unit, right? So the assumption is you already produce something, or you're ready to produce something. So the 9,000 actually is not anywhere in the marginal cost. So when you think of the marginal cost, you should separate it from a fixed cost. You should be not there. So come back to this, my question, then when you're thinking of the beginning of the marginal cost curve, it's not because the fixed cost averaged out, right? Because marginal cost even doesn't have the component of fixed cost. Okay? So what might be the reason? Return to scale, right? So more specifically, it might be learning by doing, right? So the workers produce the first car, it has to have all the special knowledge. But when he produced the second car, he already had the knowledge, and he's more skillful at producing cars. So the cost, maybe it takes fewer hours for him to produce a car, right? So here is like when you just produce a small quantity, the scarcity of resource hasn't affect all your marginal cost yet. But other knowledge, sorry, your question? Yeah, so here the curve is not exactly, corresponding to these numbers, right? So here is probably more linear or flatter. Here I probably just want to illustrate it's increasing. And actually, if you go to the real world, and you will think its marginal cost curve might be something flatter like this, and it's even have a little bit decrease in the beginning. That's what we call return to scale. Okay, so yeah, here is just tell you the trend is increasing. Okay, now comes to the hard part. So here, if we draw the average cost and the marginal cost together, what do we find? So first we would find it's usually the average cost is higher than the marginal cost in the beginning. So what's the reason for this part? Fixed cost, right? Yeah, because in the average cost, you calculate the fixed cost. But in marginal cost, you exclude that part. So in the first, the average cost is really high to produce the first two cars because it has to account for all the machine and the land. Expense of that, right? So the average cost is usually higher than the marginal cost in the beginning of the production. Then, as time goes on, because the marginal cost is lower than the average cost, the extra unit you produce, it seems like a moving average idea, right? So the extra unit you produce, the marginal cost is smaller than the average cost. So you when add that up and do an average again, then the average cost should goes down, right? Does this make sense? Any question on that? So this is very important. I want everybody knows that. So when marginal cost is lower than the average cost, then as quantity goes up, the average cost decrease. As the marginal cost, thinking of adding a smaller than the average number, then you take the average again, so all the average would goes down. Okay, so once the marginal cost exceed the average cost, then the increasing of the marginal cost will drag up the averaging cost, right? Because for extra unit you produce, the marginal cost is higher than the current average. Then you take an average again, so the final average will be higher. So if the marginal cost is higher than the average cost, then the average cost will have an increasing trend. Okay. Not necessarily, right? So because when producer decide what's the quantity to produce, he compare the average, the marginal cost and the price, right? Because if he sell 1 unit, he can get the price of the product. Suppose it's fixed. So if the price is really low, and forget about the fixed cost is already done, sunken cost, then he will produce only this quantity, right? So here is telling you what's the social optimal of this economy, of this car factory economy is. It should increase the production until here, where the minimum of the average cost interact with marginal cost. Okay? So it does not mean the firm has to produce Q0. It might produce here, or it might produce here. It depends on the price of the product. But here, I just want to tell you the relationship between the average cost and the marginal cost. And you have to remember that the average cost have a U shape, and they interact. When you draw a diagram on the exam or the homework, you should have to remember to make sure that the diagram you draw is right. I will see whether the lowest point of the average cost curve interact with the marginal cost curve. Okay? Any question? Okay. So let's move on. Yeah, here is just what I'm saying. So when the marginal cost is lower, the average cost will be decreasing, and when marginal cost is higher, the average cost will increasing. So now, how do you link the concept of average cost, marginal cost with the total cost? So how do we represent the total cost in the graphs? So the marginal cost tells you the extra cost of producing 1 unit, right? It does not have the fixed cost. So here, the graph tells you, if you want to know what's the total cost of producing 1 unit of product, it should be the area under the marginal cost plus the fixed cost, right? So basically, the area here tells you the variable cost. And then the total cost equals fixed cost plus variable cost. So if we change to quantity 2, then the marginal cost of the first unit is here, the marginal cost of the second unit here, so you have to add them together. So this is like an integral idea, right? And also you still have to remember to put the fixed cost part. So fixed cost plus the total area here gives you the total cost of produce 2 cars. Okay? So here is a general quantity. That is still the same idea. This whole area, you basically add the marginal cost of each unit here, and then add the fixed cost to give you the total cost. So here, so how do we think of the change in the total cost producing Q1 compared to Q2? So the fixed cost of produce these 2 quantities are the same, right? The fixed cost just means you have to set up the machine. And then this part gives you the change of the total cost, right? So the extra money you have to spend in producing Q2 in addition to Q1 is the marginal cost of producing 1 more unit from Q1 and another unit other than that. So basically, you add all this part of marginal cost together and give you the total cost change of the 2 quantities, right? And this part, when you're talking about the total cost change, it's only the integral here, right? No fixed cost anymore, because the fixed cost canceled out. Okay? Any question? All right. So now, how do we represent the total cost in the average cost curve? Anybody has an idea? What is the formula? How do we calculate average cost? Yeah, it's total cost divided by Q. So if we know the average cost, the simple way to get total cost is the average cost multiplied by Q, right? So here, if I tell you the quantity of the production is here, then the total cost of producing Q0 is just AC multiplied by Q1. So mathematically, it's just the area of this rectangle, right? So here is not integral anymore, because what we know that the total cost is just the product of average cost and the quantity. So it is always the area of the rectangle here. Okay? So yeah, so that's what we call about total cost and the average cost and marginal cost. So the last point here is thinking about the production decision, right? So if we think enough, how much quantity does the society should have the output, like think about how many cars should we have. We have from the consumer side, that's willingness to pay, right? And we should check the marginal willingness to pay. Suppose we already have 1,000 car in the society, should we have the 1,001? And the consumer want to spend 2,000 or 20,000 for the car, so that's the marginal willingness to pay, right? And from the supply, from the firm side, it's the marginal cost, right? It already produced 1,000 car. Should it produce another extra car? It costs the company so and so to produce 1. So it's marginal cost. So we should have 1,001 car if the social marginal willingness to pay is higher than the marginal cost, right? It's more beneficial to the society if producing 1 more car is lower than the marginal willingness to pay. So in another way, the society or the firm should expand the production until the marginal willingness to pay to the marginal cost, right? So this is from a social optimal side. Just one extra point. How do we think of, if we only consider the firm side, how much cars should the firm produce if you're using the marginal cost concept? So the firm's goal is to maximum the profit, right? So how to make a profit is if the price the consumer pay is higher than the cost, right? So firm does not compare the marginal, it's not necessary firm consider about the marginal willingness to pay. He think about what's the price of the car. Is it profitable to produce one more car. So firms compare P instead of marginal willingness to pay. So if P is higher than the marginal cost, then the firm will continue to produce, right? But hopefully, we hope the whole economy is well functioned in the sense that the demand curve reflects the marginal willingness to pay. So the price equalizes the marginal willingness to pay. Then whatever the final production decision is, it's also the social optimal. So that's just one extra point. So that's actually all I'm supposed to teach you today. So thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay.